The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseware continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or to view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseware at ocw.mit.edu.
Okay, so let's move into our topic for the day. So we've got a couple things. We're going to talk a little bit about in a silent way, and then I want to have us have a chance to present what you have created, and we'll see how this goes. So this is pretty much, at least in this second part, unknown. We don't know what's going to happen, so it should be interesting. But in terms of a silent way, did everybody get to listen to that? And what do you make of that composition called The Silent Way, In a Silent Way by Miles Davis? What do you make of that? What did you hear happening?
It seemed modal, so it didn't have like any definite chord changes, which I think gave it sort of like a, I don't know, like spacey, ambiguous feel to it.
Okay, good. Modal, spacey, ambiguous. Anybody else?
A lot of the melody and rhythms were also kind of ambiguous. There were a few like clear themes that would repeat, but there was a lot of just sounds.
Sounds.
Cool.
Okay.
I mean, the instrumentation was just very different from the other Miles Davis pieces we'd listened to. And the style and everything, like it being sort of like this slow, laid back, almost free-flowing piece with a more, I guess, like electronic feels to it.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Right, and because what were some of the accompanying instruments in
It
this?
sounded like maybe like a synth, I want to say. Was that a synth?
Fender Rhodes.
Okay.
Actually, two Fender Rhodes piano, which is sort of old school, but you see these around a lot. In fact, we have one at MIT, which the current pianist with the FJE likes to haul it out and play it, so that's great. And somebody playing the organ as well as that. What else? What else did you hear? Instruments.
How prominent the instruments were to one another was more uniform than like the recordings we listened to.
Meaning?
Like, it's not like that. Obviously, the trumpet had the melody the whole time.
Right,
Like,
right. So a lot more diversity of who's sort of in the lead and that kind of thing. Was it only that sort of ambiguous, free-floating sound? Was it only that, or did it do something else?
Well, after a few minutes, it maybe stops that and changes it up, and then you've got like suddenly you've got a regular beat, like it sounds like a complete different feature world, and then it drops back to something else.
Okay, a regular beat, and what was the rhythmic feel there?
It's just more like a really regular jazz kind of thing.
But I mean, was it jazz? Was it?
Not like, I mean, it has like the sort of rhythmic feel about it, but it's like far more percussive and upbeat than the
Percussive, okay. Anybody else have a term that could characterize what it went into? We all heard the piece, right? And it was a fairly long piece, right? Like about 20-minute piece. Okay. I was sure you would catch this. It goes into essentially a rock kind of a feel. It's a more subtle rock feel than what you would have heard from a rock band in that period, but it's nonetheless, that's what it's going to. This became sort of the signature piece that moved jazz into what was called jazz rock or fusion. In 1969 is when this came out. So, and in fact, this middle part is the longest part of the whole piece. It's where most of the soloing happens. And then it returns to the sort of quiet quieter, more lyrical thing at the end. And I put these names on the board because it turns out that this is actually a piece that was put together in the studio. It's a studio realization, you could say. And the first part is called In a Silent Way, and that's composed by Joe Zawinul, who was one of the 3 keyboard players. That shows up at the beginning and at the end. In the middle is a piece that both Zawinul and Miles Davis co-composed called It's About That Time, which is the more funky rock type of piece. And so they decided to essentially blend these pieces. And the further thing about this is this was an early attempt by people in the studio, one guy in particular, Teo Macero, who worked with Miles Davis a lot, to essentially sort of, you could say, cut and paste, because they used to have to splice tape to make cuts and paste them back together before digital editing. And so there's some of that that's going on in the middle section. And in fact, the last section is exactly what was played for the first 4 minutes. It's just a replica, it's a replication. It's the same exact music, just pasted in at the end. So it sort of calls into a new perspective what is improvisation and what is jazz composition, really. And you're going to have a chance to talk with Neil Leonard when he comes in about another month about exactly that, electronic usage, computer usage, and improvisation stuff. But this is sort of an early attempt. The other thing that I wanted us to listen to this for is that this basically is a jazz version of the format that we're going to hear on Sunday at the Indian concert. Because how many people have had the Music of India course? Anybody have that course? You've had that. Anybody else? And so you know that the way that the music in the raga tradition works is there's a very slow presentation, as it's called, of the raga, the main melody. And then after that is allowed to be stated in a very lyrical, free-floating way, then you get this rhythmic sense with a particular cycle or a tala that comes in. And so it's hard to believe that Miles Davis was not influenced by John Coltrane, who had previously been part of Miles's band, but Coltrane, as many of you know, had explored the music of India. And so it's sort of like a cross-influence coming back from what somebody had originally been a player in Miles' band coming back to inform him. And this piece really has a very Indian, at least, pattern to it, if not Indian music. It's not a raga, but it is its own particular mode, as people have said. Anybody know what mode it was, or did you try to figure that out?
Did it begin in Dorian? Because it began with a flat 107th, I think.
Okay. Anybody have a different take on it?
Figured out which notes were in the mode, but I don't know if I could remember them. I was playing along to it, but I didn't think about what the actual mode was.
Okay,
So,
but you tried to play along with it. That's
yeah,
good.
I feel like I figured out which notes that
Okay.
should fit.
Anybody remember what was going on at the same time that the melody was being played? So obviously I'm going to suggest you go listen to it again so we can hear more deeply inside of what's going on. Let me just come over to the piano for a second. I made a brief transcription of this melody, and what's going on is, if I can just get over there, we've got the first thing that we have with this is a drone. A drone is just a long note underneath the melody, and we've done that with some of our exercises, right? Where we've just had a basic tonal center. To act like I didn't call it that, but that's what it is. Same thing in Indian music. There's a drone established by one of the instruments, and then the melody works off that. So in this case, it's an E. So you're always hearing this E, and then it's actually, this is the melody. It starts on the third. If you were an E and you had E major chord, it's actually the third of the E major chord. But you never get that chord, you just get this. that's a big interval. That's a minor seventh jump. And here's where you get the tip off of what the mode is. And what that is E to D natural, which means that it's E essentially mixolydian. Because if you had come in that same phrase and gone, it's totally different. And it winds up on the fifth, which is the B, which is again an open sound. So except for occasionally getting a major third of what might have been the chord, it's really ambiguous, which a number of you said. Yeah, Jamie, you had a point.
Yeah, it's funny because the piece that I wrote, which I wrote after I listened to the song, was in E mixolydian, so obviously that transferred over.
Deeply
subconsciously.
influenced by this piece, and that's
So
great.
I knew as soon as you played that was E mixolydian.
That's okay. That's how we learn. That's how and that's a great homage to this particular piece. So what we've got here, in other words, is a pretty simple mode. It's just one, and it almost sounds like it's major, except for that little trick note that I pointed out. But that's a very distinctive note, and so when you listen to this again, pay attention to that, because it really is the thing that sets this piece off apart from many others. Now, the interesting thing about this is, according to people who have really studied this and interviewed people who were on the recording session, when this was Joe Zawadil who wrote this tune, the one we just talked about, when he brought this into the recording session, he had chords with it. He had chord changes written for it. And Miles Davis saw this and said, why don't you just, said to the guitar player, John McLaughlin, why don't you just play the melody? And it sort of took McLaughlin aback. It was like, well, what am I going to do with the chords? And the piano player said, what are we going to do with the chords? He said, don't play them. Just, Dave Holland was the bass, Gesundheit, the bass player, just put an E pedal underneath all of this, play the melody, and let that be the whole thing. And so, according to these people, again, at the session, they did this, and no one was sure how it was going to turn out. And when they heard the playback, they were just astonished, because it made so much sense. And this is sort of the next level after Kind of Blue. In fact, it was 10 years after Kind of Blue, so it's sort of like moving from that, building on that direction, incorporating some Indian-ish type things with it, and coming out with what we had. So I really do recommend you listen to this again, try to hear some of these other things that are happening. And when you hear the middle section, this other tune that's called It's About That Time, pay attention to this, because this now shifts the tonal center up a half step to F. Some people say it's mixolydian. I hear it as a pentatonic sound. So see if you can maybe play along with that. That would be a good one to play around and just see what you can figure out on the bass line. And that's all it is a bass line. With a lot of textures. Remember, we've talked about textures from the other instruments, and this is particularly so with the 3 keyboards. So it's a great piece, and it bears listening to again. Okay, so the assignment for you guys was to come up with a piece that was similarly a long flowing melody of between 10 and 15 notes, and then figure out a way to present it. Who would like to present their piece?
So this is the melody sort of goes like this. That's just sort of the thing that we're going to play around on, is this. And there's a second part that will come in occasionally. Just like that, which is that second part. Alright, so why don't you
Very nice. Play those opening notes that you played when you told us what it was made out of.
I mean, just like the
The little melody notes
Oh.
that you had played originally. Sarah, what does that sound like? What kind of music does that sound like?
It does kind of sound like Indian.
It sounds like Indian music. Have you heard much Indian music?
Oh yeah, before. That's what I thought.
Well, it must
was.
be going into your consciousness.
Yeah. At one point, I was like, oh, it sounds a little Indian.
So when you hear the concert on Sunday, what you're going to hear is something very similar to that. The slow that'll be the presentation of the raga, that sort of idea that you just did. And in fact, when you got into that rhythmic thing, particularly your picking style, as well as piano, that would be very similar to what the tabla, the drummer, would be doing to give a percussive thing. So this is great. This is like unconscious processing of where we're going. So brilliant and very nice playing on the saxophone.
Thanks.
Very nice. And bringing out what would be called the characteristic feature of the mode, or if it was a rag, there's certain particular things. And Phil Scarf, when he comes a week from, well, it'll be on next Monday, he'll be talking about that. Very particular, specific things. So very well done. Good job. Good job. Who would like to go next?
It goes from D Dorian, G Mixolydian, C major. So yeah, piano should be playing chords, and then the melody, I was thinking flute, and oboe could maybe improvise on part of it, like when you get to the major. That's C major.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, and there's not really time to this, so I sort of suggested which notes might be shorter and which ones might be longer, but take whatever time you want. That's why I figured maybe it's not best to have lots of people playing at once.
Do you intend to have it sort of move around a couple of times, or just play it slowly?
Yeah, I think once would not be enough, so maybe let's do 2 or 3 times. And I'm going to set this out because transposing and to keep it quiet. So I guess flute and piano whenever you're ready.
Very nice. So who was you were playing the actual melody?
Yeah.
And you were improvising with the mode or something or around it? Very
It's
nice.
the percussive improvisation at the very beginning.
Oh yeah. Sorry. I should have like tested a couple notes.
Very, very nice. Very nice. Cool.
Yeah, I've got a simple melody which I'd like, again, to be played by the flute. Just sort of loop it around. I didn't explicitly say what notes were longer than others, but in the middle there, I've got these 3 notes which I kind of wanted everyone to get in on. Specifically
Those
these
notes specific, like those exact notes.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
specifically those notes. So everyone play like in unison or as you get further along. Yeah.
So we should all be playing the.
You have the melody.
Is it, we all play the whole time, but those 3 notes we play the notes in unison.
Everyone's playing the whole time.
Okay.
Maybe at the start, actually, the first time through, just the piano music, and then when you loop around,
Okay.
you guys come in. And for you guys, so it's E Phrygian. Stick with the E most of the time, but also, at least at the start, bring in like the A and the B specifically. And it's not too slow, so just keep it moving. Yeah.
Okay.
Can we play the mode one time, too?
Oh, yeah.
Alright. It's just one at a time. Do you know? E Phrygian?
It's just all the white notes from
Yeah.
E to E.
Yeah. That's constant. E. That's on the key of the D, so.
Very nice. And so what was this one mode or two
No,
modes?
that's just one note. It's
Just
E
one
Phrygian
mode.
throughout, yeah.
Very nice, very nice. And was your part prescribed or were you improvising?
So there were 3 notes sort of in the middle of that. The do-do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do-do. I guess I'm not quite singing in key, but yeah. So there were 3 notes, but every time it was prescribed. Other than that, improvising.
Okay, good. And the same for you other folks? Very nice, very nice. But you were playing the melody.
I had the melody,
Yeah.
yeah.
Very nice. Good, good, good. Very nice. So you actually had chords written down, chord symbols, which is an interesting way to go. So we haven't had that yet today, I don't think. We might have, did you have chords in yours? So that's what because I was going to write that on top. I want to mention some of that. So that's an interesting way to think about it. And we can explore this a little more. I don't want to take time now, but it's an interesting way to think about it. It's another facet. Just try this. Take those first 5 notes and play them a little more like a rhythmical idea, like this: bop, bop, boopy, boop, bop, and then the next one, and then the next 5 same way: bop, ba doobie doo, and the next bop, ba da be da. Yeah. Just do that over and over again, and Alex, play those same chords but in time now. So I'm going to count this off: 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I'm just showing that because this would be another way to make a variation of what you've done. In other words, similar to Silent Way, you've got your lyrical thing up front, and then you could turn it into a rhythmical gesture, let's say, and if you had yet a third instrument, you guys could be essentially the rhythm section, and somebody else, oboe, whatever, flute, could take a solo on top of that. It's just another thing to think about in terms of extension. Very nice, very nice. Yeah. Now, did you have a written part?
No.
You were just making something up.
I was making that up.
You were improvising, and you were playing
I was
this.
playing that.
And was this? But so you.
It
but
wasn't
you-
exactly.
So you had a rhythmical scheme, but you didn't put a meter with it, so it
Right.
wasn't like 4/4/6. That's very nice.
So, yeah,
Very
that-
nice.
that embellishments and
I was figuring you'd keep going until one of you dropped, mainly you, because you have to keep breathing.
Yeah.
But that was really nice. That was really nice. We could have gotten everybody involved in that. That would have taken up about an hour. That would have been great. So there's something to remember. If you get hired for a job sometime and you run out of material, you can always do something like this. You can fill up easily 5 minutes, 30 minutes, and you're golden. So if you run out of your set list, just a practical tip. Very nice. So if you want to put your name on that, let me have that. I guess you guys have to run. While they're leaving and the next person decides who wants to be, I just want to say a thing about chords. And I know this, Jacob, this is your piece, so I don't want to say anything, but you had said D Dorian, and you also put D minor, D minor chord to indicate you wanted a D minor chord. And that's fine, that's perfectly fine. Sometimes, and you see this on the lead sheet for So What, which we looked at and we've studied it, it'll say D Dorian, D minor 7. It's a shorthand for saying that's a chord that works with the D Dorian scale. But in fact, it's often not so good to use this. It's much better just to put the mode, because if you do that, then the piano player is immediately going to think, let me play that 4-note chord, which is triads. And triads, remember, is not the sound that we typically want with modal. We want a quartal, like a fourth bass thing. So when people do this, when they put that down there, sometimes you're sort of snapped into that other way of thinking. It's not that it's wrong, it's just that it's not quite into the idiom of what we're trying to do with modal stuff. So, okay, thank you all. So who would like to go next?
I guess we can start with the saxophone melody. There's like a vague sort of rhythm, but you can definitely change that, especially after like the first time. Electric guitar, you can start out just like emphasizing the D and then the other notes basically you feel like, and then you can basically transition to the melody yourself after whenever you feel like it, and feel free to like change up the notes. This ending part here is just pretty straightforward. Don't change it up.
Very nice, very nice. So that, again, that was like, what, a single melody? And that's all, just some verbal instructions. Very good. Very, very nice, very nicely played. Okay, let's keep moving along, and I want to urge us if we could make the presentation just a little bit shorter, just to make sure everybody gets a chance to have their thing heard. So who would like to go next? Okay.
All right, so this is for a flute and a piano. So it's Dorian, and it's just a basic melody. So what I wanted was like the flute to just like start the melody and just keep looping back through it, and it has a rhythm. And then I wanted the piano to just, I guess, add their own improvisation to it.
Really nice. Piano, what were you doing? Were you reading off what that was?
What?
Were you reading off that melody?
Yeah, I was trying to sort of align the rhythms, playing mostly the fourths.
So you were making that up, the
Yeah.
fourth idea, but you were following that.
Yeah, I didn't play any of the melody. I was just sort of trying
Good,
to match it.
good.
Yeah.
Who did that sound like to you, or to anybody else? What did that sound like, the piano and flute playing together? A little bit, a little bit. Anybody else? Classical, any other classical? Sounded very much like Ravel to me.
Yeah.
And in the kind of blue situation, if I don't know if you've read the pages that were up there, I don't know if this was in those pages that I put on Stellar, it talked about how both Bill Evans and Miles Davis adored Ravel. And that in fact, when they would listen to music in their own apartments, that's who they often would listen to. Interesting for a jazz person. And that was very definitely in Bill Evans' mind. So you're channeling this, so this is great. It's beautiful. A beautiful flute playing. Very, very nice idea. Really nice idea. Wonderful done. And I'm getting a kick out of the fact that most of you guys are not playing on your own piece. That's very interesting, because you want to hear what's going on. I understand that.
So basically, I would like the guitar to start off playing the melody and kind of set up a cycle of some sort, and then I'd like Sarah to improvise over his melody, but starting with notes reading from right to left, if that's okay. I hope it works. I'm not exactly sure yet. And then I would like you to play, I guess, whatever cycle he sets up. If you could just like play chords under it, but I guess at like half tempo.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, you didn't sing on this. That's very interesting. I was sure you were going to.
Oh, no, that's
That was very nice. And actually, it's interesting how these are just emerging just by the way people are volunteering. But this sort of could be a perfect complement to what your piece was. I mean, it would make sense to meet that. So okay, so I'm not. And some of the rhythmical people, you were clearly on a similar way.
So sax is going to play the melody, and the rest of us will just play like soft chords in D Dorian. I wrote out a pretty specific rhythm, but you can take whatever liberty you want.
What is this?
This is just the transposition of that. Yeah.
Makes sense, okay.
So it should be D minor.
Very nice, very nice. I feel we're in the realm of French impressionistic music here. This is lovely. It's very peaceful. Did that work like you thought it would? Except for the transposition.
Pretty much, yeah, just in a different key.
Yeah.
There was one note that was, I don't know, this
Right.
one.
Yeah. So
I don't know what happened to that.
Right.
But
Yeah. So where I was doing B Dorian on the sax, that should have been a G sharp, I think. So I just
Okay.
made that change.
Right.
But yeah, it did sound kind of weird. So I don't know.
But
what
yeah,
happened
the
with that.
general mood was basically what I
Yeah,
was going for.
very nice,
so.
very nice. Okay, who wants to go next
I'm good.
of our remaining contestants? Really nice. So if I got from your instruction, sort of like intertwining or interlocking segments, is that the idea?
Yeah, that was kind of, again, a train wreck. I think I need to, like, fix my read up. But that sounded really nice, and the
That sounded
unexpected
great.
ending was cool.
Yeah, really, really nice. Very well done. Very nice, very nice. Cool, cool.
So I don't have anything written. I was going, I guess, for more of an open conception, but I was thinking just me and piano. That's cool. I was thinking D Dorian.
Okay.
So the only real like solid concept I have like something of a melody. So I guess I was thinking I would just kind of riff off of that, and I wanted it to have kind of like a minor sound, I guess. So I don't know. I guess kind of do what you want with it.
Do you want like a beat or just sort of chords?
Yeah, I mean, I guess more chords.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, alright, cool. So yeah, I guess you can start it off.
Very nice, very nice. And I was waiting for someone to do this, not have anything written down.
Yeah, I can get something to you next week, but.
No. But I was waiting for that because that's often how our improvisational conceptions generate. I mean, I asked you to come up with something, but I don't think I said write it down. I said come up with something. And writing it down is perfectly fine. And yours was almost all handwritten with a couple notes. Other people had just the notes. Other people had some notes and chords. Any of these are fine. But they just give us a generative point from which to work. So very cool. And obviously, what happened in each of these instances was way more than what you had on paper. That's the idea. In other words, these are wonderful. And if you didn't give me one of these and you had it as a written out form, I need to see that. But the point is, what happened in the room is the music. That's the music. These are all starting points. These are all springboards. So you're all doing wonderfully. So give yourself a round of applause. Really, really nice. Really nice. So that's it.